So hi everyone, I'm Carolyn. I'm a fourth year medical student at Dundee, and today I'm going to be talking about my intercalated dissertation in medical education, which looked at international medical students' experiences of psychological safety in feedback episodes. Feedback is a well-established concept in medical education, and it's been researched thoroughly with studies identifying key factors that influence its effectiveness, and some of these factors include feedback, relationship between feedback providers and students, the style of feedback, hierarchies, and the level of interaction in feedback conversations. It's still quite common for tutors and students to feel uneasy about providing feedback or criticism, often with the fear of upsetting the other person, and this can suggest a lack of psychological safety in feedback conversations. For the purpose of this talk and for my dissertation, the definition of psychological safety that I referred to was a shared belief that the relationship is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. However, feedback practices are still far from perfect, and in fact they can differ across disciplines and even cultures. One of these examples is that overseas healthcare systems often features doctors as the highest authority and primary educators, fostering a hierarchical dynamic that hinders integration into Western culture for international doctors when they come over. And this often results in a hesitation to voice concerns or contest opinions due to this established hierarchy that they were used to. Additionally, several studies have found that the academic attainment of international medical students and the educational support that they receive is below that of their peers. So given that there are cultural differences in healthcare practice, and it's expected that culture also plays a role in medical education, it was important, I felt important to sort of explore this a bit further, where cultural factors have not really been explored in relation to feedback episodes. So for a bit of context, University of Dundee is a multicultural medical school, and specifically in third year, while we have international students from first year, specifically in third year we get an additional cohort of transfer students from partner universities in Malaysia and Brunei. So these students join in year 3, and it sort of made them a perfect sample group for the study because they can provide insights from both their overseas institute and their experiences in Dundee. The study was conducted during the consolidation block that they have in January for an SSC in third year, and that's focused specifically for the transfer students. And this allowed observation of feedback processes tailored to the transfer students, and a significant number of them are international. I say significant number because we also received transfer students from St Andrews at that time. So my study mainly focused on examining international students' experiences of psychological safety in feedback interactions within the Dundee undergraduate curriculum. These were the key research questions that I focused on throughout my study, and these were targeted to sort of understand the students' experiences of feedback and psychological safety, both in their home institute and at Dundee as well. For my project, I used focused ethnography, and this allowed for in-depth examination of cultural aspects, and it was better suited to the time constraint of the BMSc project. Participants were sampled using purposeful sampling, and they were selected due to their authentic insights of cross-cultural experiences of feedback. The overseas students in year 3 were contacted via email to see if they'd be interested in participating, and during fieldwork, faculty involved in the teaching sessions were invited for interview. For focused ethnography, I used a mixture of observations and semi-structured interviews. So I observed sessions like clinical skills, procedural skills, and Q&A sessions over the consolidation block, and this amounted to 13 hours over 8 sessions, and I took handwritten field notes at the time. This was followed by semi-structured interviews, where I interviewed a total of 7 students and 4 staff who volunteered both for observation and interview. These were conducted via Microsoft Teams and were audio recorded and transcribed verbatim. After this, the interview findings and the observation notes were analysed using a combination of inductive and deductive thematic analysis. Following this, the key findings were 4 themes with interlinking sub-themes, and I'll go through each of these themes and their sub-themes, and on the slides I've also included a key quote that I thought represented the theme quite well and hopefully gives you a bit more of an insight into why these themes stood out. So within the first theme of feedback delivery, we have feedback structure and style, environment, and briefing. Students perceive feedback as constructive and more like a conversation, and this helped them to stay open-minded in their feedback processes. Staff often prioritise highlighting positive aspects of feedback, and this helped to mitigate any negative impacts of feedback as well. Discussing feedback collaboratively motivates students to embrace independent learning, and explaining the reasons behind suggestions often help them to understand and apply the feedback more effectively. It also built trust in the tutor and improved their overall psychological safety in the feedback process. However, one student in particular felt uncomfortable with feedback that singled them out based on their international background, especially when compared to local peers. This perhaps reflected a lack of awareness of cultural differences amongst tutors, which negatively impacted the student's sense of psychological safety. Large groups were perceived to be intimidating and made it harder for both students and tutors to feel comfortable when giving and receiving feedback. Small groups, on the other hand, were preferred for being more inclusive and reducing power imbalances. Session briefings played a crucial role in creating a respectful and safe environment. They set class rules, normalized mistakes as a part of learning, and clarified the expectations both for teaching and feedback in that session. Within the next theme of educator factors, we have expressing vulnerability, body language, and positioning. Supportive body language like smiling and clapping greatly increased students' confidence and encouraged them to participate more. This was in line with some empirical findings from other studies in medical education, which showed that nonverbal signals can improve in communication and help people understand each other better. Another effective way to build psychological safety was when tutors shared their own experiences of vulnerability and doubt from medical school. This approach reduced power imbalances, built trust with students, and encouraged them to ask for help, and overall lowering their fear of academic risk-taking. An example of this was when I observed a tutor explain a mistake he made in one of his OSCEs, and he used this to sort of reassure the students that they can overcome mistakes and still succeed. It also acted as a nice anecdote to sort of relieve a bit of the tension and stress in the room and help the students sort of build more trust in their tutor as well. Within the next theme of cultural factors, we have transitional challenges and feedback culture. One of the major differences found in the educational approach over both of the institutes were that previous institutes of the students focused more on the accuracy of medical knowledge, with Dundee perhaps placing more of an emphasis on communication skills, and this was specific to when I observed procedural skills and communication skills sessions as well. As shown in past research, the medical students in this study were also used to a strict hierarchy in how they received feedback at the previous institutions. This is because they were often explained that the feedback was a one-way system, and it also indicates that their past experiences have played a role in how they step into their future experiences and limited their willingness to participate. Therefore, it was an important factor for faculty to sort of help them adjust in their transitional challenges, both across cultures and in institutions as well, and help them to feel psychologically safe. And this sort of emphasizes the role of that host institution in easing that transition for students across different countries. Within the final theme, we have longitudinal educational relationships, and the two key relationships here are familiarity with peers and familiarity with tutors. Peer interaction significantly influenced students' feedback experiences, with group familiarity impacting their willingness to be vulnerable and to engage in the sessions. Both students and faculty agreed that having consistent long-term relationships with tutors was essential for building trust and making students more open to feedback. But changes in tutor arrangements were seen as a problem because they could create unfair expectations and lead to subconscious comparisons of students. However, we did recognise that this was sort of a timetabling concern, and there wasn't ever any guarantee that the same tutors would be seen all the time. For the purpose of this block, however, there was some consistency seen in the tutors who were conducting these sessions. Over the period of the study, there was a positive change that I observed in student behaviour, with more interaction and proactive seeking of feedback, and this perhaps suggests that the psychological safety was improving as students became more familiar with their peers and tutors over this SSC block, and this also highlights time as an enabler of psychological safety. With a view to future research and perhaps some of the limitations in this study, I would suggest a larger scale study involving several institutes and a more geographically diverse cohort. This is because my study only included participants from one of our overseas partner universities and was perhaps limited in the breadth of information that could have potentially been examined. Some of the key recommendations for future practice would be having detailed briefings at the start of each learning activity, again involving that class rules, emphasizing that this is a safe space to sort of express themselves and bring up concerns, and providing students with a safe learning environment. Another key practice would be student support initiatives to improve feedback literacy and help students to build intercultural differences. While formal feedback training is available for tutors to standardise feedback practices, perhaps opting for a development in the intercultural competence could aid, particularly when having transfer students from other universities to help their transition from one country to another. And finally, enhanced communication between tutors and partner universities to improve support for international transfer students as they transition from one institution to another as well. Here are some of the key takeaways from my project. I hope that this study has emphasised the importance of fostering psychological safety in cross-cultural feedback practices, and I feel that these findings are relevant amidst the growing globalisation of medical education and the mobility of students across borders. Thank you everyone for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. That's really interesting. I think it's a really good reminder about how different environments can be, particularly when you're looking at personal growth and educational growth. I was interested to know that it's quite a regular thing at your university to have students from partner universities joining midway through a course. Aside from sort of feedback within a more structured setting, do you think there's anything to be done in terms of integrating them socially that might help with, you know, when you get to that feedback setting, people are more familiar to you aside from your tutors and things?
Yeah, so one of the other findings that, because it was sort of not very relevant to the feedback side of things, wasn't really included in the study, but a lot of the students that I interviewed sort of mentioned that their peers, again, were really influential in terms of integrated into the university culture and the culture within Dundee and, you know, socialising and things. And within Dundee, we're all put into small groups. It varies in terms of sizes, but a lot of the international transfer students identified their peers in their small groups as being really interactive and really sort of outgoing and introducing them to other people, inviting them to events and things that sort of helped with that integration. There was also, you know, transfer students from previous years who have set up societies to sort of help again with the newer transfer students to sort of integrate into the culture, help them with things like communication skills and clinical skills to sort of help with those transitional challenges that they might face as well.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
Cool. So Shemai everyone, hi everyone. We are, my name is Louisa and this is Ellie. We are the co-presidents of Cardiff University's WAMS, or Widening Access to Medicine Mentoring Scheme. We're here today just to talk to you about what we do as a scheme and do a 7-year evaluation, as this is our 7th year in operation in WP in Wales. So a little bit about who we are and what we do. So we are medical student-led and we rely entirely on volunteers from the top down. It was founded in 2017 with the aim of providing application support for Welsh state-educated students only. And that support was primarily on application-specific things, so UCAT, interview prep, things like that. We began by going into schools to do this support, but we have diversified over time to do in-person and online events, which is basically the crux of what we're trying to talk about today. And since our inception, we've had 3,697 contacts with students, and 1,008 of those occurred in 2023-2024, which just shows, I think, that this is really growing and it's becoming really popular at the moment, and hopefully that we're seeing an increase in students who are interested from Wales. So just a little bit of background about why we do what we do here in Wales. So on the graph on the left, you can see that the blue line shows reapplies and the red line shows first-time applied. That's not really relevant. What is relevant is the trend. So we've had consistently volatile number of applications from Welsh domiciled students applying to study medicine. And actually, particularly concerningly, in the last 4 or 5 years, we've actually seen a big decline. So in the 2024 admission cycle, there was 810 Welsh students who applied to study medicine. And actually this year for the 2025 entry cycle, UCAS is saying there was only 700. So actually we're in a huge issue here with recruitment of Welsh domiciled students to come and study medicine. On the right, you can see the table with the just most recent competition ratios for the UK FPO. in Wales, and you can see these are quite a lot lower than some of other deaneries. And actually, this isn't the whole problem. So we're not struggling to recruit doctors to come and work in big cities like Cardiff and Swansea. We're struggling with peripheral regions like North Wales and West Wales. So actually, we can't get doctors to come and work in Wales. So why don't we do more to support our Welsh students who will come and train in Wales, stay in Wales and work in the Welsh NHS and fill those gaps for us?
So this is just kind of a combination of some of the data that we've collected over time. So we began in 2017, but it ran as a pilot year, so there was no data for that. But if you have a look at the graph there, so the darkest kind of boxes on that graph show the school visits that we've done, and those are pretty consistent actually over time. And you can see at the bottom, 34 schools in 2018, 2019, 33, 23, 24. And whilst we are seeing more students at these visits and we're actually doing more visits at those schools, the number of schools have stayed the same, and that is something that we're concerned about in terms of it's a barrier for us in terms of how we access students, because if we're historically working through the schools, if the schools are not engaged, either because their teachers are inundated with things, they're too busy, or because there's like one or two students from those schools that are interested, which is the experience that both Louisa and I had, and then they don't really think it's important for them to engage with something like this. So that's why we decided, particularly through COVID, and since then, that it was important for us to look at alternative ways to reach these students. So we've diversified our events to have them online, but also to have some in-person events that are not at schools. And we've seen a 49.2% increase in pupil engagements via those. And those are illustrated on the graph in the sort of the slightly lighter green. And we also introduced a conference in 2021, which was online, which had quite a large attendance, which is that sort of light sort of grey-green box on the graph. And that actually declined in 2022 and 2023. And we kind of think that was probably because people were getting fatigued with the online format. And so we delivered it for the first time in 2024 in person, and we had a massive number of applications. And actually that box that's on the 23-24 pillar is not really representative, because we had a lot more applications and we just didn't have the space to allow all of those students to come. So that's definitely something we're looking to do in the future, is to try and increase our capacity for our conference.
So just quickly looking at some of the feedback points we've had in the last 3 to 4 years in operation. So in the thought bubble, you can see the greeny blue colour is positive and the reds are negatives. So overall, it was actually largely positive feedback. Most students particularly identified sessions as being informative and motivating, which is really reassuring for us, because that's what we're aiming to do. I think there's a lot of literature out there that suggests that students from WP backgrounds struggle to turn their heads to medicine in the first place, and it's seen as like a culturally very different thing to study. So actually, if we're motivating and inspiring and raising those aspirations earlier, that's what we need to be focusing on. And the areas for improvement that were identified: so lack of interactivity. This was generally after the sudden move from face-to-face and then back online when we sort of hit the pandemic. Students really missed that experience of being able to like sit with a mentor, a current Cardiff student, sit with them, talk to them, and like learn more about their journey and ask those questions and get a more personal response. Speaker confidence and the ability to answer questions, which are really difficult to do over like a webinar format similar to this, and technical difficulties, so particularly around sort of audio and camera quality. But we've actually been able to build on a lot of these areas of improvement and improve our events as we've gone on through the years.
And then our events throughout the year kind of culminate in our conference. So like I said earlier, we've held this since 2021. It was online for 3 years, and then this year we held it in person for the first time. So we invited students to come to a conference. We had one in Wrexham and one in Cardiff, and in total we had something like 115 across both sites. Students come, and only for Welsh domiciled students. And we invited them to come to some lectures on things like student finance and sort of confidence building. And then we had workshops in the afternoon where we had medical professionals come and talk about their careers. There were some practical skills, paediatrics, emergency, GP, just for them to, in lieu of work experience, kind of have some time meeting these professionals, which obviously, as we know, WP students don't get to meet very often, and hear from, and then also just do some practical skills because it's fun. So we gave them some before and after questionnaires, and they scored a statistically significant improvement across all 5 of those domains that you can see there on that graph. And all of the parts of the day were rated as good or very good by 90% or more of the students. And some of the kind of qualitative feedback is there, again, in green for the positives and red for the negatives.
So just talking in particular about the growth and sort of dynamics of online sessions that we found as a scheme. So we were entirely in person until COVID hit in 2020, and we had that very quick move from going out to schools and meeting the students to actually like being behind a screen. So at this time, we also established a social media presence. So we had Instagram and X accounts. And in that first academic year, 2021, we had 333 followers. And up to the end of the previous academic year in July 2024, we had a 50% increase over that time to 674. And actually just looking at the data from the last 4 months, from July until the present day, we've had almost 10% increase. So actually we have a lot of momentum as a scheme, and we're really starting to reach out in Wales to not only the students from the schools which always produce medics and of course need support, but also those schools that actually don't produce medics very often, but their children are no less deserving of our support. Initially, we were using the online function to go into schools. So instead of like physically going in, we were connecting with them in their classrooms and having those discussions. Had lots of teething problems, which is where a lot of our constructive criticism came from with like sort of audio quality. And then the conference in 2021 as well. So I think lots of students were struggling to access work experience at that time because of COVID, which would ordinarily have been face-to-face in hospitals. So actually this gave them work experience in lieu of that. Throughout the years, we've continued to visit schools with a mixture of online and in person, but actually the webinar function for us is something that's really grown. So we can do webinars where we can invite students and advertise it on social media, meaning that those students whose teachers aren't engaged with us can actually access our events. However, a lot of our feedback has been suggesting that those students would like to be brought together from different schools so they can network with like-minded people. It can be quite lonely when you're the only medic, as we were at our schools, and you don't really know anyone who is medical, let alone have a colleague or a friend who's applying. So actually, it's a more engaging way to learn. It's a way to network with each other, and it's bringing those students together to make them feel less different and like medicine is actually a choice for them.
So looking forward to the future, we have spent a couple of years doing this and being in charge of it, but quite a few more years being involved. And what we've noticed over time is that we think that it would be better to, like Louisa was saying, bring these students together, but also not rely so much on schools and arrange things through the schools. So from this academic year onwards, we've developed this curriculum, which you can see there's 7 types of events for different age groups. And what we're doing at the moment is organising visits where we're, so for example, in Cardiff, picking one venue in Cardiff, either at the hospital, university building, or sometimes a school, but inviting students from anywhere in the local area to come to that. So it wouldn't just be students from one school. And that just allows us to bring them all together. They get to network and, like Louisa was saying, learn from each other. And it also means that we're not dependent so much on individual schools for their support, and it allows students to all come from different backgrounds.
So future plans for us as a scheme. So the most exciting news we've got is that we're launching as a charity very soon, and we're hoping that this will facilitate some of our bigger and bolder plans and help us to support those students that really need that support better and more effectively. So the research we've currently got ongoing includes a longitudinal study of the cohort of students who attended the conference. We're going to be following them throughout their academic year of year 13 and seeing where the gaps in their support are and what we can do as a society to help them. And also a study of the current medical student cohort at Cardiff to complement one that was done 5 years ago and compare whether the culture is changing. We're moving towards larger in-person events, more collaborative, and allowing the students to connect, and also allows us to really funnel our resources into big and beneficial events. We're continuing to support the sixth form students, but also we want to extend that mentorship down to the lower age groups. So we know that a huge problem for all WP students is actually raising those aspirations in the first place. So if we can connect with them when they're younger in the secondary school, we're really going to be making a difference further on. And actually having sort of a pilot study looking at supporting those WP students once they come to university and help them to bridge that cultural gap and reduce the imposter syndrome they feel and just support them throughout their journey through medical school.
So yeah, thank you all for listening, Deal. If you've got any questions, then we'd be happy to take them. Now I've got to figure out how to unshare my screen.
Hi, sorry, I've got a question if that's okay.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks very much for your talk, and it's really good to see that you've actually put in so much work over the last few years, especially in an area that's often neglected. My question's just about the data you presented at the start about a lot of doctors leaving Wales after the foundation programme. I wondered if you have any data yourself, or if you've come across this about how many students from Wales actually stay, and whether it's doctors going to Wales to do the foundation programme and then they leave, or is it actually Welsh students leaving? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's something that we're actually interested to find out. So we haven't got that data at the moment, but as part of the cohort study we're going to be doing at medical school, we're going to be following the graduates and seeing where they go. But sort of from, I guess, a non-evidence-based experience, a lot of students come to Cardiff to study who aren't Welsh and then will go back to the area they were brought up in. And I think because we're not recruiting enough Welsh students in the first place, I think that makes the feeling like more people are leaving because we just haven't had as many join in the first place. I suppose with WP in general, I think students from those backgrounds are more likely to go back and work in the areas they come from. So that's our sort of rationale behind increasing Welsh applications. And I think even though we've got 700 Welsh domiciled students applying, not all of them are state educated. So not all of them are from a WP background. There are a significant proportion of those which are privately educated. And obviously that's kind of a different culture in itself.
And I think another thing I would just add to that is we have 470 foundation jobs in Wales. We don't have that many students at any Welsh medical schools. So even if every single graduate from a Welsh medical school decided to work in Wales, which they won't because they're not all Welsh, and even obviously Welsh students will want to move elsewhere, we don't have enough anyway. So that's a whole other problem in terms of we're not generating enough. But in terms of proportion of people that will stay, we know that it will be better if they are widening participation students who are more likely to live and work here long term.
And that goes for any students Welsh domiciled students studying medicine at a non-Welsh university is also more likely to come back and work in the Welsh NHS as well. So it kind of works both ways.
Thanks very much.
Thanks
for your question.
That's really interesting. I mean, my experience so far has been predominantly in the Midlands and now in the east of England. So I've never got that close to Wales in anything that I've done because family and things are all over here. I had no idea that, the number that you're recruiting for is more than the number you're generating. That's a really kind of way of putting it in terms of the longevity or the composition maybe of the NHS.
And Wales is a very geographically diverse region. We've got big urban places like Cardiff and Swansea, but actually like West and North Wales are really sparsely populated, very rural, and aren't producing any homegrown medics. And secondly, students, even Cardiff or Swansea medical or Bangor medical school students don't want to go and work in those areas. So students who are coming to Wales from, having never lived in Wales, they're not going to sign themselves up for going to such a rural area. So actually, I think we've got like a twofold problem in Wales. We're not recruiting enough and we just can't staff them.
Within our own, we're doing a load of, we're doing like 200 mock interviews over the next week for students in Wales, but we've got, is it 80 in Cardiff? And we've got 10 in North Wales. And we've got 14
11 in West Wales.
So that just kind of demonstrates as well in terms of ratios and proportions that we are really struggling with some of these more rural areas.
Absolutely. I think something that was mentioned earlier on in the day was about rotational training and that the impact that then has. And if you've got an area, so east of England obviously is very different, but it does still have that pockets of being completely rural. And then you've got places like, Essex and Cambridge where people kind of gravitate towards much more. But the idea that, you may live somewhere for a couple of years and set up a family life and then have to move again because the deanery is so vast that,
100%.
commuting doesn't work. Yeah, absolutely.
I think Ellie and I are from those rural areas ourselves, and like even though we live in the same deanery of Wales, we're about 4.5-5 hour drive between our hometowns, which is actually a huge deanery if you're considering rotational training.
Which is madness when you think about the fact that we are meant to work and have a life. But
yeah.